So, guys, welcome to the next episode of my podcast, Deep Talks from New York City. My today's guest is Siddhartha Bala. Welcome, Sid.
Welcome.
And cheers.
Cheers.
We are drinking, again, my special Japanese green tea. So,
Or we should say
enjoy.
kampai.
Kampai. This one is very strong.
Did
So
you
you-
brew it yourself?
I brought it from Japan,
Yeah.
always, because they have the best Japanese green tea, of course. Yeah. So, and let me introduce you. You are innovator,
Yeah.
you're storyteller, you're a successful entrepreneur, and I have to tell that you are one of the smartest guys I met here in New York. So I'm so grateful that you come today, and we are going to have this discussion.
Yeah, I'm glad we met and had a wonderful time talking. And it looks like we look at the world in sort of unique and interesting ways, right?
Yeah, and
And I think there's a lot to be said in terms of not just us, but how so many young people today are just looking at the world and seeing new opportunities and new perspectives and
Yeah.
new possibilities.
Hey, it was one of the best discussions really I ever had. So I want to share some of those thoughts today with my listeners. And I want to start with tell me your story, where it began and how you started your career here in New York.
Yep. So one of the things that you and I talked about is this notion that everybody is a superhero, right? And so just like all superheroes, everybody has an origin story. I think if I was to look back at some of the things that shaped how I look at the world, a lot of it has to do with dealing with a lot of adversity. I highly recommend adversity. So somebody who I know had a child who was going up to Harvard. And they asked me, what do you think my child should learn about? They're going to Harvard. And I said, they need to learn about failure.
Right.
Because one of the first things, one of the ways that you get geared and prepped to go to an Ivy League is through accomplishment. So your whole life is a series of accomplishments. And the way you tell your story is, I led this and I founded this and I incepted this and I worked with all these people and I was a leader and I had the success, right?
Yeah.
And I think the first thing you need to learn about is failure. So adversity early in life helps. I came to New York when I was 18 years old to go to college. And I actually picked my college out of a book. So I got the Big Barron's book that was about this thick and looked through all of them, and my analytical brain started working in terms of what made sense. And I picked a college in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
And what's interesting, I got to tell this story about my knowledge of American geography at the time, which I knew I wanted to go to New York or LA. And I didn't know that New York was also a state.
Okay.
So I was picking all these colleges in no-name towns in the middle of New York State. And I also picked colleges that were in LA. But I didn't know that LA was also the state abbreviation for Louisiana. So I was picking all these colleges that were in Louisiana. But luckily I ended up in Newark, New Jersey. And I remember the first day I was driving around and I saw a glimpse of the Statue of Liberty. And I didn't really realize how close Newark was to New York. And the first time I ended up in New York, I remember walking through the streets and all the people and suddenly realizing I'm home. It was a really weird feeling. I don't know if you've had that. I feel like everybody has this sort of sense of home, which may not be where they were born.
Yeah, I have it after 1 year in New York. I slowly start to feel that I'm home here too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the city is amazing. One of the best cities in the world. Come on. Yeah.
How do you
We are
feel? How do you
so
feel
lucky. Yeah.
about Tokyo?
Tokyo is a little bit different. I prefer Kyoto. Kyoto is in my top 3 list. So it's Prague, New York, and Kyoto are my top 3 cities. And in all of those 3, I feel home.
Yeah.
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 What are
Kyoto's
your
pretty cool.
top 3 cities?
I love Tokyo.
Uh-huh.
I always said if I didn't have to live in New York, I would live in Tokyo. I also like Stockholm. If we're talking about Europe, I loved Stockholm. Just the walkability of it and being able to get everywhere. There's a lot of cities around the world I love. I like Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur.
Okay.
Yeah, so I like crowded cities. I love cities where there's a lot of young spirit and entrepreneurship. and a sense of possibility. I find Stockholm to be very innovative, and I like the way things work there and are organized. Tokyo as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
So continue with your
so we were talking about origin stories,
Uh-huh.
and I think one of the critical things that I feel I appreciate about my personality that I'm so glad to be able to share with others is thinking about innovation, right? And where does that come from for me? A lot of it has to do with my early thoughts about how to be different. Apple used to run that ad campaign called Think Different, and I think it's very simple but subtle. That this whole notion of being different is a key to creativity.
Right, and the way how we met was that I was talking with our friend, and I told you that I was playing in a punk band, and you told me that you are punk too. So being different is a definition of being punk, in my perspective.
And the whole punk attitude is critical to be able to not only look at the world differently, but then actually do something. It's not enough to just think, right? You have to also do. And I think in order to do that, you have to be willing to not respect hierarchy and structure, right? So that's a very punk thing.
Then we can remake the Apple quote: not think different, but think and do stuff different.
Right. And a lot of it is about having courage, right? You don't just think different, but you have to be able to go out there and change things and be willing to put yourself out there, be vulnerable in a sense. And if you look at a lot of the ways that punk influenced not just music, but society and fashion, it was being willing to go out there and be very visibly different from just what society was doing, but also what society was expecting.
And it's outside of the social comfort zone. Like, it's easier to be part of the crowd and be like the others, but being different, in the beginning, you have that kind of feeling that is outside of your comfort zone. In the beginning, it's not a pleasant feeling that you have if you're different. So how you started, like, what was your first moment that you did something outside of the crowd?
So I have so many stories, but I think I remember being in the third grade and going up on stage to sing a Simon and Garfunkel song, which was Sound of Silence. And I remember everybody laughing at the song. Like, what do you mean people talking without speaking? What do you mean people hearing without listening? And they just thought it was a very strange concept. And that, that ability to power through and still do that. I also remember taking part in a competition that was about you had to dress up in costume.
Okay.
So my costume was Mowgli from the Jungle Book.
Okay.
If you can imagine, a very simple costume. But then to be able to go and dance on stage and sing, bare necessities without being afraid of repercussions or what people would think was, there's a lot of things like that. It's just something as simple as a collage, right? You look at art, being able to, when somebody asks you to represent something, it's really easy to draw a picture. But then to do a collage, which means you cut out things and paste pieces of paper, it's something unusual. And I remember being in a class and being asked to represent something and doing a collage and everybody looking at me and saying, what are you doing? You're just cutting up random pieces of paper and sticking them together. But then when you see how it comes together, those are some early memories that I have of just doing things that people didn't expect. Okay. And I think realizing that, hey, I didn't die, the world didn't end. I can still go on, and I made an impression.
Yeah, it's kind of addictive, like, to be different, because you get used to that.
Yeah.
Feeling that being different means that you have more attention sometimes. And for me, when I had a band, it was quite interesting part of my life, because we were at a high school and we were playing. We had many concerts. And I really enjoyed, like, being different in that moment, because you had much more attention than if you were just average.
Yeah. Were you the only punk band in town?
No, there are many punk bands, because the city was really about punk. So we had like four maybe five punk bands in our city that was quite small, and some of them were like more famous than we were because we are just like kids and beginners. But we had many concerts with one of those famous guys, and they took us for a tour, and it was amazing. Like I was 17 years old and playing with one of the well-known bands in the country. So and it was incredible. And I think that it was the beginning of my career, because then when I started my own business, I already had this kind of punk values in my head, and I started to do the business differently.
Yeah, sounds like that's a sequel book for you. It's talking about how punk influenced you and how you can use punk values to bring about change, right?
So what is the name of the book?
No, that's your next book.
My next book. Okay, okay. So my next book will be about how. Actually, it's covered in the first book.
Yeah.
Because there is a chapter that I call like everyday heroism, and basically this tool is to live outside of the social comfort zone, like to do things differently. So I don't call it punk, but it is punk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's covered in the first book. But well, maybe the next book can be about that too. So how about your next book, your first book?
I don't have a book yet. Yeah, so it's about my first book. One of the things that we've talked about is all the different ideas that come up, and you feel like you have to write a blog about it, right? One of the things that I've been thinking about really is, so when I look around, I feel like, so I've had some experience in finance, and one of the consistent things you see in finance and how people approach finance is how we make suboptimal choices. We look at all the information in front of us, and then we make choices that are driven sometimes by emotion, but they don't really correlate to everything that we know. And what ends up happening is you end up with these outcomes that are not necessarily in your best interest. Right. So when I think about it, I realize that we as human beings, we make suboptimal decisions, whether it's about relationships or finances or what we want to do in life or career.
The brain is quite irrational thing.
Yeah. And so that's something that I'm really interested in exploring, is how do you get people to think outside of those limits, so that we're actually making better decisions for ourselves, right, with better outcomes. And then also, is that a skill that can be taught? Can we teach people how to train themselves to make better outcomes, even in the face of emotional inputs and data that doesn't map to things that they know about?
And can we do that?
Yeah. So I think it can be taught, but a lot of that, again, going back to bucking trends and society and structure, is for all of the 20th century, we've been trained to think and operate a certain way. Right? I call it the industrial century.
Yeah.
And now we're in the information century, and it's a really complete different mindset shift.
Yeah, and we need new paradigms even at work, because like those old structures, like hierarchy and those structures that were maybe good with the first machinery factories. We live in a very different world now, so we need to change the mindset and the structure. So what do you think? Like, what is the best way how to help the big companies to think differently?
Well, I think it's hard to do that, and I've seen that from the inside. Is when you've got the whole structure for corporations is just designed around different information flows. So information flows top to bottom. The structure, different people know different things. Information doesn't necessarily flow from the bottom to the top, right? And it's kind of strange that we live in a world today where information flows so freely. Like you and I are doing a podcast right now, and we can record it and put it out there, and anybody can see it, right? And that doesn't necessarily work the same way in organizations or corporations. So having worked through a lot of those things, I think where it falls apart is the culture of organizations, the way people are. And you can walk out the door of one corporation and into the other, and you'll encounter a very different culture. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what culture is. And the way that culture is represented is in a set of behaviors. So the best way to understand, I always ask people, name an innovative company. Right? When I say innovative company, what do you think of?
Yeah, Tesla.
Yeah.
Or SpaceX.
And it's funny that we can point to a company and say, okay, that's an innovative company, and there's something about it, right? Or I say, name an innovative country, and you can tell me some innovative
Sweden,
country.
for example, I guess, in Europe, or of course in the US.
And what makes them innovative is their cultures. And it's really hard to take You can't say, oh, let's just copy Sweden and we'll be innovative, right? It comes from within, and it's a lot of changes in how we think about things, how we behave. And then when I take that one step further, I realize that those behaviors are driven by incentives.
Mm-hmm.
So what are our incentives? And in the traditional corporate world, our incentives were, hey, I want to get a promotion. I want to be that guy. I want to be this person. And
sometimes very unhealthy incentives. Yeah.
And the classic example you would encounter in interviews is you'd be sitting across from somebody and they'd say, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah.
And most people would answer that question within the construct of the company, right? They see themselves as, oh, where am I going to be in 5 years at this company?
By the way, it's quite a stupid question to ask that in that complex world outside.
Yeah.
Like, if I tell myself where I was 5 years ago, a very different world. The book wasn't out. Probably I was in a different country with really different set of friends. Now I'm here, so I could not imagine myself in 5 years. It can be like whatever. I can be in Japan. I really don't know. Yeah. So the question is quite stupid to ask in this complex world, like where you think that you will be in 5 years.
And it probably made sense in the industrial world because things didn't change so much.
Because it was like slow paced, and you could predict things.
Yeah, now you can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that exist today that we didn't predict 5 years ago, and there's a lot of things that are going to exist 5 years from now that you can't predict, right? And like for example, I don't think anybody predicted that YouTuber would be a profession,
right?
Gamer,
right?
Those are professions that exist today because of the world that we live in. So I think that also in the industrial world, a lot of our identity was bound up in work.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
like your social status was directly influenced by your position in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I'm an engineer, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, and so on, right? So when the first question you ask each other at a party is, what do you do? And that was your identity.
And now it's quite difficult to describe what you do, because we are in such a complex world that even our positions are like very, very like complex. Yeah, what I do, like, am I an author or entrepreneur or podcaster or like thought leader, or I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I am. Well, but I enjoy what I'm doing.
I always say that you have to, now your identity is your name, right? I'm Peter.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And my brand is my identity. Yeah,
exactly. And then you go out and you create your brand, and people get to know you by what you do, and then you become a true superhero. Yeah. You take your superhero identity and share it with others, and that also is the other classic craziness of the 20th century was follow your passion. I heard that a lot of times growing up, is follow your passion.
Yeah, but in the beginning you don't have a passion.
It's hard to know what your passion is.
Passion is something that you build. So you have passion after 5-10 years. Yeah. So before that you don't have a passion. So what to follow?
Yeah. And I think the secret to figure that out is understand who you are as a superhero. Like, what do you love? What are you good at?
Like your strengths.
Yeah, strengths. And then it doesn't make a difference to just hold those strengths to yourself. You've got to figure out how to use those strengths to help people.
Right. That's the best definition. Yeah. In my world, like if I do consulting, I always ask people like, what are your strengths and how you can use those strengths to have a positive impact on society, on others, on groups that you are part of, and so on. So this is, in my world, the best definition of ideal career. Use strengths and help others.
Yeah, and then that becomes your mission. So you go from following your passion to following your mission. So follow your mission.
And then after 5 years, you can feel passion. Yeah. Because passion is the outcome, not in the beginning. Yeah.
And also there's a lot of fulfillment when you get that feedback loop where you've helped others and now they see how you've impacted their lives, and you get that feedback. And that's really what drives you to do more.
Right. So, and now do you have your passion or you follow your mission?
So I think there's a lot of things there, right? And it doesn't have, that's the great thing is, another thing that will get disrupted as a consequence if we understand what our mission is and the fact that our mission can be multidisciplinary.
Right.
So for example, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about punk music, right? We could talk, I'll start talking about gardening soon, because that's another thing that I'm passionate about. But you can exist in that world where you have different disciplines and different passions and be okay. Like all of those can exist within a single mind and a single person. Right? And I think that's what we need to encourage. I saw something yesterday about how the other thing we need to disrupt about how we're prepared for the world is this notion that everybody progresses at the same speed in school, right? So you learn, and then you go to the next grade. And it works the same way in corporate worlds as well. Is you've got all these titles and you've got a progression scheme and everybody's trying to get to the next level. But what if you took that away? What if you took away the structure? What if you took away the hierarchy, right? And let people operate in a more open and free way? You would get a lot more diversity, because now you're not operating within the confines of linear structures. It's a lot. It's a lot more representative of what the world really looks like. In the world, you have thousands of different data points, and they're all connected in a network, and that's okay, right? So we haven't yet figured out how to take that network model of how the world operates and then work in that way in a corporation. It's all very linear and hierarchical.
Okay, and do you have any like successful examples from companies that you worked with, like how you helped them to change, or some like positive stories?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that's important, a lot of companies say people are our biggest asset, but we haven't figured out how to tap into people, right? So I think that one thing that I've been very passionate about and seen a lot of success with is creating career paths for people right out of college, and then building that and making them true components of how to have a successful organization. The other is building teams that have many different types of diversity, whether it's people at different points in their career, people from different backgrounds. All the dimensions that you can think of diversity is building teams that have many different representations and skills, but then allowing people to focus on their strengths. Like the two things that we've been trained on is if you get 100 on a test, that's success. If you get a 0, that's failure, right? And we're always trying to optimize success. And then people get graded in terms of, was this person excellent resource or not excellent, and so on. But if you take that away and start focusing on people's strengths, everybody can be a 5 on a 5-point scale. And that's what I found in experiences. You build a diverse team and focus on people's strengths. Don't focus on their weaknesses. Help them grow, and you get a lot better outcomes. That's one. The other is attacking the notion of success and failure as a binary and having a continuum. And the way you do that is by experimenting.
Yeah, like so prototypes, testing things.
And so rather than having a project where you say, I've got this project, I'm going to go build this thing, and here are my plans, here's my strategies, and I'm going to execute on this. And a big thing, I've seen a lot of projects that are 2-year, 3-year projects fail to deliver the outcomes because they went big bang, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And what
in the
works,
IT sector, it's all the time.
Yeah.
They're building like those huge softwares, and at the end, after 3 years, you realize that it's a nonsense build and it doesn't work. Yeah. So like short-term goals and prototypes is also like a way how to improvise better, because you have the feedback much quicker, so you can improve the product. And I really believe in the structure or the system too.
Yeah. So I'm a huge believer in experimentation, and I would say that if you want to build a successful team, a product, a company, get a bunch of people in the room who have really good skills, that you want, and get them to work together and approach your problem you're trying to solve with small bets, right? Experimentation, show what works, and you'll be amazed. You'll end up with something that you didn't expect going in, right? But because of the inputs of the people in the room and the process of learning, because we fail to account in that process of success and failure, there's actually learning. When you fail, you learn. Yeah. And we don't build that into our models. So we've got to incorporate failure and learning.
Then people are unable to admit their thoughts, and they could not learn. And it's very bad if you have a hierarchy structure, and people then are unable to admit thoughts. So you repeat them because they are just, okay, everything was fine, but they know that it wasn't. So yeah. So how to embrace like this ability to admit thoughts? Because I think it's all about ego. Because if you have ego problems, then you are unable to admit that. And we see that not just in businesses but in politics too.
I think as a leader, it's important to model the behavior. Mm-hmm. So leaders have to be willing to be vulnerable and go out there and say, hey, I messed up. And it's okay. Yeah. You won't die.
But like if you have those hierarchical structures, then what happens is that those with the worst egos are on the top because they are more driven to success. They are more driven to have those position of power. So, and mostly they are the worst role models for this kind of behavior. So what to do with that? Like how to change the pyramid, the structure?
Yeah, I think
from
that's
the top because fish things from the head. So
yeah, that's a tough problem. Yeah, I can't say that I have the right answers, but I think what would be useful is to look at correlations of results, right? Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you said success. That definition of success needs to be reworked, right? What does success mean?
Exactly.
And I think if we redefine what success... So, for example, we're seeing a lot of work right now where financial results are being tied to social responsibility. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's a good idea. It may or may not work. I don't think we necessarily have all the information that we need to assess to say whether something has a positive social outcome or not. Yeah. Social outcomes take 30 to 100 years to figure out if it was a good idea or not. Yeah. Right?
But when starting to think about that is a good beginning.
It's a good beginning because
about social responsibility.
Yeah, it goes back to the notion that culture is driven by behaviors and behaviors are driven by incentives. So if you make the incentives different now, so it's not just about profit and loss.
Exactly, yeah.
It's about outcomes. Yeah. Then you start to drive different behaviors. And those different behaviors are different hallmarks of success. And those different hallmarks of success will result in different leaders. Yeah. You're not going to have the same kind of leader whose mindset is profit and loss, black and white, binary mindset, rise to the top in an organization that's more around outcomes that are 30 to 50 to 100 years, right? It's a very different kind of leadership you require.
Yeah, and for me, the core of this leadership are values, because if you have right values as a leader, then you set the good incentives. Yeah. If you are just a psychopath and you want to focus just on growth of the revenue or the profit, then at the end, you have just the psychopathic incentives. Yeah.
What do you think of corporate values?
Well, I was working on many projects about corporate values, and sometimes it's just bullshit, empty phrases that are everywhere on walls, but no one believes them. But if you have real values that they are authentic and leaders they really live those values, I think that's the core of the culture. Yeah. Good values, but values that are lived, not values that are just on walls.
Yeah, and I've seen companies that have 10 corporate values. I've seen companies that have 7, right? So I think there's probably a number that makes sense, because I think if you have 10 values, what are your values?
Yeah, we have 3 values, for example. Our first value is critical thinking. So whatever we do, we try to do things that are evidence-based. We try to use critical thinking as a way of deploying new products and helping our customers to also improve their critical thinking. So for us, the evidence-based approach is the core value, and I think it's number 1. The second is purpose, doing things that has some impact on the society. So that's why kindness is so important to us, to really help people to have better lives and inspire them. And the last value, and you will love it, it's a punk value, being outside of the box, being those little everyday heroes that they are doing things differently. So this combination, the evidence-based approach, purpose, and heroism, punk style, I am trying to live those values every day. And I think it works, because I have colleagues that they have the same values as I have, and then we are successful. So, but I have small team. It's quite difficult to deploy this strategy for a company with 5,000 employees. The bigger the company is, the more difficult it is to like sustain those values there.
Yeah. And I think there's also this notion of speaking truth to power, right? So if you've got a company and you have values, when you scale and you get to be bigger, you want to hire people who don't agree with you.
Right.
So you want people to challenge you and say, do these values make sense? Are they the right values? And are you demonstrating them in the right way? You want people to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
And I feel like if people have the same values or they've just bought into the system, it's harder for them to hold you accountable.
Wow.
So you do need to have diversity is important there. Yeah.
So what are your values then?
By the way, I think we should spend time thinking about values. And the first time I came across this notion of having values, it was actually in a talk I was listening to with Vinod Khosla. Right? And he said everybody should think about what their values are. Most people go through life without thinking about what their values are. And when I heard that, I realized I'm one of those people. Right? I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about what my values are. And if you can narrow down on what your values are, then you have a set of first principles from which you operate. And then everything that you're doing and the way you behave and the way you interact with people kind of makes sense. And I think the two things that I've settled on that are important, I think important in not just to me in terms of how I see myself, but important in how I realize I want to interact with the world, are courage and humility. I think those are the two things.
Wow.
Courage is important because you have to be able to go into a world where there's a misfortune and wrongdoing and injustice and say, hey, I'm not willing to stand for that. Right? That's one thing. And then the second is the humility actually comes from knowledge, because when I was younger, I lived all in the brain, in the head, right? Very intellectual. Everything was about, what do I know? What do I know? What do I know? And we talked about this, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect is when you're young and you've learned a whole textbook worth of stuff, you think, oh, I know everything there is to know about quantum physics or whatever it is, right? And then you grow up and you realize, hey, I don't know that much. And I think that knowledge that you don't know everything, that you can be wrong. There's a lot of situations in life where there's no right answer. Right? There's many wrong answers. And you have to be humble enough to accept that you can be wrong and be open-minded and willing to learn. Because if the moment you say I'm right, then you stop learning.
And I think it's very important to start with humbleness and then courage. Because if you have courage without humbleness, it's very dangerous. If you have someone that is not humble but has no courage, it's much better. So I think that we should do a product as a pill, like humbling pill, that can solve the ego problems of mankind.
So I actually I had an interesting conversation on this topic with somebody where I said, well, a lot of the misfortunes we've had in our history as a human species has been this notion that this is mine. Okay. And so I said, what if we took away ego, right? And I think that there's an argument to be made that a lot of the progress that we've had, or what we call progress, has been a function of somebody saying, I'm the best, I'm good, I'm better than you, I'm going to do this different. So it's hard to say what value, there might actually have been a value to having an ego in terms of all the things that we've been able to accomplish. So in my mind, the jury's out on that one. I'm not sure about whether if we had a pill and got rid of ego that we'd be better off.
Just the humbling, a little bit humbleness of those people that are 100% sure about themselves. Just decrease the level of certainty of them from 100% to 95. To give there a little hole of uncertainty is the key. Not just to decrease the ego from 100% to 0. Just a little humbleness for everyone, and and so now you have those values, and how you are trying to use them in your daily life.
So I think the courage aspect of it is, well, it's easy to do in a corporate environment, I think. is wherever you see something that you think that you can change, you should. Right? It's and one of the currencies inside of corporations is political capital. So political capital, a lot of people see it as a finite resource. Right? It's actually an infinite resource, and if you can think of it as an infinite resource, you can do a lot of things.
Can you go deeper in this idea?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of fear, right? We don't. So, for example, I'll give you an example. One of the companies I worked at, we had a knowledge sharing platform, and I had somebody who was very talented. I knew. I said, "Hey, you've got all these amazing ideas. Why don't you go and share it?" And he said, "What if my manager doesn't approve of it?" I said, "Well, it's your idea. You think it's good, just go out there and do it," right? So I think that the way we're set up is people are afraid to stick their necks out because the consequences are uncertain, and the consequences are more likely to be negative if you're not following the mainstream path, right? So I think there's lots of within that kind of structure where everything is mandated and predictable, and we're trying to actually make things as predictable as possible. There's lots of opportunities to go out there and say, let's change things. Let's have the courage to do that. Another example is I was hiring for a position and I got a stack of resumes, and I looked at the stack of resumes and it's a technology job. No women in the pile. And I sent it back to the recruiter, who was a woman, and I said, what happened to the women? And she said, that's what the job market looks like. And I said, no, I'm not willing to accept that. And so you have to challenge those things, those kinds, all of those. I've been in a lot of senior leadership rooms, and I look around the room, and there's no women, right? And those are the kinds of things where, what a great opportunity to change things, right? We're in a position where we can question things and say, hey, this doesn't look right. This doesn't reflect the society we live in, and actually make changes. You know, so lots of opportunities for that on the courage front. On the humility front, it's a little bit more tricky because the moment you say I am humble,
means that you are not.
you're not being humble.
It's a paradox.
Yeah. So I think it's more of a acting in the role of looking for opportunities where you can be humble. There's a classic acronym in corporate speak called HIPAA. Have you heard of this? The highest paid person's opinion.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So if you find yourself in a room where you are the hippo, then you get to practice humility and saying, let's hear some other ideas. You know, let's champion other ideas. Let's promote things that you may not necessarily agree with, but you're not going to get the best outcomes if everybody in the room is just looking at you.
Okay, so I had one idea that I would want to discuss, and it was like, if you want to be more courageous, then you have to live in uncertainty, and you should change your mindset that uncertainty is it's not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
So how can you change this kind of mindset? Like, because as you said, like, people, they want to have a predictable world.
Yeah.
They want to know the second step, the third step. They want to know where they see themselves in 5 years. So how we can like tell people like, okay, now change the whole mind and enjoy the uncertainty.
We have to have a lot more experiences where uncertainty is okay.
Okay, cool.
There's a game I like to play with my kids. I give them 2 dice, and I say, you're gonna take a piece of paper and you're gonna write down the number that appears, right? The sum of the dice. So you throw 2 dice, and what's the sum that you get? And you do it 50 times, 100 times. And what you'll see is that you'll get a distribution, right? So you'll get, it's really hard to get a 2. It's really hard to get a 12. It's really easy to get a 7.
Okay.
Because there's many more combinations of 7. Like with a 2, it's just a 1 and a 1.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can get a 7 with a 5 and a 2, or 4 and 3, and 6 and 1, and so on. And so they're always surprised when they see this distribution that, oh, it starts to look like a normal curve, right? So you can teach people about the normal curve without, through experiential learning. But when you walk around in the world, you start to see whenever you've got large numbers of things, they start to fall in this distribution, and that distribution represents uncertainty, just like a dice throw represents uncertainty, right? And then what you start to realize is the boring stuff that has a very low reward is all clustered in the center. And going back to what I was saying is, how do we get out of the mindset of taking choices that are suboptimal? Is we tend to be comfortable and live in that middle region where everything is predictable, and in fact, most people make those choices. You take the subway every morning. Everybody's rushing towards the exits in the same way at the same speed, and the best way to not get caught up in that is not participate in that game. Right? And so that's the game of life. Is everything you do in life, there's a large volume of people that are making the same decision in the same way with the same choices, and you have to opt out of that. Say, I'm not going to play that game anymore. But then there's two sides of that normal curve where the uncertainty lies. Right? So the predictable stuff in the center, the uncertainty is out on the edges. One of them you're going to win big. One of them you're going to lose big. Right? So if you say, I'm going to be willing to play with uncertainty, you have to be willing to lose big.
Okay.
But you can minimize that risk of losing big by doing small experiments.
Okay.
So you do small bets, small bet, small bet, small bet, small bet, small bet. And then you'll find that you'll get better at what you're doing, and your wins will accumulate over time. So the idea is to know that there's uncertainty, and the way you mitigate that uncertainty is do small bets.
Yeah, in my world, in my company, it is about to deploy 5 simple products and measure outcomes, and maybe one of those products can like earn more than others, and then continue with that product. So start with prototypes, and of course, if you lose everything, and you lose only those small investment in those prototypes. So, yeah.
A lot of corporations don't have patience for that.
Okay.
Right. So again, it's a mindset shift. You have to be able to demonstrate value, because doing something small and losing, there's no incentive system for that. Like, how do you incentivize people? Say it's okay to play small and lose. Everybody's focused on playing big and winning, right? And so you've got to change that mindset, because you've got to say, if I do 100 small experiments and 40 of them succeed, that's success. Somebody said to me, you can get into the Hall of Fame in baseball with a 300 average, right? That means 30% of the time you succeeded. You'll be in the Hall of Fame in baseball.
Wow.
And so we've got and again, if you look at baseball statistics, a lot of numbers, probability distributions, when you're standing at the plate and you got to decide if I'm going to hit or not hit. And you make a choice, that's a micro experiment. Right? Standing at the plate and deciding whether to hit a pitch or not. And you do that over and over and over and over again over the course of a career. And if you're 30% successful, you'll be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Right? That's a mindset we need to start to propagate more, so that people get more comfortable with this notion and redefining what success means.
So, you said that you have 2 kids. Yep. So how you like, what you do, like any other examples, like how you helping your kids to understand those concepts, like playing those.
I don't think I'm very successful at it. Yeah, so I think the classic mistake that I made when I was a young parent was thinking my kids were mini-me's. Okay. And they're not. Right? They're unique individual human beings with their own perspectives on life, and they have.
This is very wise, actually. Many parents don't think like that.
Yeah, they're very unique individuals, and they both think independently, and are different. And if you look at them, they think very differently, have different values, and I think the key is to encourage that. You want to encourage independent thinking. You kind of give general guidelines. You say, I like this, I don't like this, and you give feedback and say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, and so on. But I think kids today have far less freedom than we did when we were growing up.
Yeah, right?
There's a lot less freedom. Yeah. So when you have a lot less freedom, you have a lot fewer opportunities to learn.
I remember I was like 6-7 years old, and I bought 20 boxes of matches, and I fired them all, and I was like I lost my earbrow, and that was cool. I was 6. I could not imagine my kids now, like 6 years old, being outside in Manhattan and playing
with matches. Yeah, my brother and I played with matches all the time. Yeah, we always got caught.
Yeah. But it was freedom, yeah. And we learned those things that we are using now.
How many times after that have you burned your eyebrows?
Like many times.
Really?
Yeah, like I remember like 3-4 cases. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really loved to play with fire. I don't know why, but fire was like kind of thing for me.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. We used to go by trash cans and set all the trash on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you learn from that, right?
Yeah.
And it sets a different course for your life in terms of how you think about things. I mean, we didn't grow up to be arsonists, whereas people would think, hey, if you're playing with fire, you're going to grow up and be an arsonist. But that's you kind of...
Those are little experiments. And that's why I loved chemistry so much, because chemistry was my maybe the most favorite subject, because we had an amazing teacher, and she encouraged us to do experiments, like to really try to mix that substance with that substance and just play. It's the definition of the game, like to play with things and see outcomes.
Did you play with potassium permanganate?
Yeah.
It was my favorite chemical in the lab.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and she had like set of experiments, and every hour she had an experiment for us, different experiment every hour, and it was like super fun, and she was maybe the best teacher I ever had.
Yeah,
because of those experiments, and she led us to do things, even sometimes it was dangerous, like really dangerous, like playing with some substances that can really like blow up or things. Yeah.
There's another book we have at home called Dangerous Things You Should Let Your Kids Do. You know, it's full of experiments like that, like licking a 9-volt battery. You know.
Is that really that book?
Yeah, there's a book. I'll send it to you. It's a lot of fun.
That's really cool. That's the thinking outside of the box. Yeah. Because like if you are like very like if you are afraid of the thing that kids will get hurt, then you just make a very safe environment for them, and they are just stuck there. So
and it doesn't map to reality.
Yeah.
Right. The real world has a lot of things that you have to be challenged by and go learn about and think about.
Okay.
There's actually another thing I wanted to tell you is this talk by Alan Watts. And he says something pretty profound in there. He says, if you see straight lines, that's where man has been. And he talks about nature and how nature is just wiggly all the time, right? Everything out there is wiggly. And we try to make sense of it, and we create these straight lines. And straight lines is our approximation, because we're able to deal with straight lines. It's really hard for us to deal with it. Like if our highways were all curvy all over the place, we wouldn't be able to make sense of it, right?
And I think it's part of Japanese aesthetics, wabi-sabi, like those old pottery that are like perfect because they are imperfect. Yeah. And I love minimalism, and minimalism is not about nothing. It's about just the perfect amount of things. Yeah. So
that's another value I think is worth exploring, right? As we live in a world of, you're constantly bombarded with all this ads and Instagram influencers and commoditization and consumerism. Well, you also have a minimalist movement, but the interesting thing with the minimalist movement that I'm seeing is it's also coming at you through the same channels, right? Of buy this book and learn how to be a minimalist and clean up your room and so on. So it's almost like the channels are the same. But again, it's an experiential process. You can tell somebody to be a minimalist, but you actually have to experience it and then align it with your values, right? If your values are aligned, then it kind of makes sense. I like the idea of minimalism as a time saver. because the less stuff you have, the less you have to worry about taking care of things and maintaining them and so on. It frees up a lot of time for you.
Yeah, it's also in my world, minimalism is the way how to be effective and how to survive in complex world, like how to fight those like problems like decision paralysis. Like if you have so many choices that you are paralyzed, but if you have like 2 things, 3 things, then it's easy to focus on those. So yeah, it's my way how to survive. I think that without minimalism I would be crazy already.
That's why we don't have a multi-party system in this country. We only have 2.
Well, I think that's not minimalism. So let's discuss politics a little bit. So what do you think? What is the solution of the like? And we see this trend all around the globe, like the division between 2 parts, like us, them, and it's not just in the U.S. So how to unite people? How to help them to understand that we are quite the same?
Yeah, that's another tough problem. I don't know if I have the answer to it.
That's why the podcast is called Deep Talks, man.
Yeah. So I think we have to be comfortable to talk to people who don't agree with us.
Right. Yeah.
I really strongly believe in talking. Again, with diversity, right? Like we're in New York right now. I always tell people that New York is not America. And if you want to understand America, don't sit in an armchair over here and talk about what's great for America. Go out there and travel the country and meet people and talk to them. Yeah. And when you talk to a lot of people, you'll realize that everything that people believe is based on their experience. And different people have different experiences, different values, and then different outcomes. And what one person thinks is important may not be what another person thinks is important, but that doesn't mean that they're not important.
Okay.
Right? Because it's valuable. Valuable meaning coming from values and valuable, right?
So is it about respect, like other opinions, or is it about like being active in trying to understand them, or what is the core of
so the mistake,
this ability?
The mistake people make is trying to convince others based on logic.
Okay. Right.
Like the typical political conversation is, oh, you have a different opinion. Yeah. I don't agree with that, so let me try and convince you that my opinion is the right one. Again, the mistake of thinking a bit of right and wrong, right? Not different. That's why I love the Japanese word chigao. Right? Chigao is different. And if I don't agree with you, I can say chigao, and you know that I mean that, hey, there's a different way of looking at it. We don't have that in English. And I think you and I talked about language and how linguistic constructs can influence how people think, right? So I think it's more than respect. It's about being willing to have the conversation and hold on to your opinions. If you don't agree, hold on to them and say, yes, I'm willing to talk to you, and I understand that you can have a different opinion. But I think that we can never expect that everyone is going to think the same.
Right.
Not everybody's going to feel the same. And so by definition, we have different situations. I think that the danger is when it polarizes into 2 camps, because then it becomes a true us versus them. And being in New York, we know about this because if you go to a New York-Boston baseball game, you'll see Yankees and Red Sox, and this is a rivalry that's been going on for over 100 years, right? And the Yankee fans will hate the Red Sox fans will hate the Yankees fans. But as I think it was Seinfeld who said, you're just rooting for uniforms. So you take that away, and you've had players that go from team to team, and then you'll have a Red Sox player go to the Yankees, and suddenly the Yankees fans are rooting for them, right? So they're not against the people, they're not against the players. It's just the values and what they stand for are different, and so it's a clash of value systems that you're seeing in play. And I think that's really what happens is a lot of the influence in terms of how the story is told ends up pushing people into 2 camps, where the moment you identify with a camp, then you start to think that the other person is wrong, the other person is evil, the other person, and
we call it in-group bias because we have a lot of signs that you don't feel empathy with guys from the other team, so you can do very nasty things for those people from the other team, and you don't feel empathy. So at the end, like it can end like very, 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 like in the history, like those concentration camps and like in all wars, basically what we saw that even Japanese were the maybe one of the most cruelest like people in the Second World War, Japanese.
And you have to think about what causes that. Right?
Yeah. And I think the main cause is in-group bias, that we don't feel empathy with people from the other team.
Yeah. And one of the ways I think to step out of that is, again, invoke your inner punk and say, I'm not going to identify with a group. I'm going to step out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be an American. Don't be a liberal. Don't be a conservative. Don't be a Republican. Don't be a Democrat. Right. And say, what can I bring to the conversation? What can I be? How can I contribute? And I'll tell you, I've learned a lot. I've talked to people from completely different parts of the spectrum. I happened to be sitting next to somebody once at a bar that was brought up in the Ku Klux Klan, right? And I could have been, I don't want to talk to you. My instinctive response was, tell me more, right? And guess what? I would have never learned as much as I wanted to learn about that topic if I didn't have somebody to talk to about it.
Right. Yeah.
And the same thing with, there's many different communities in America. Like, America is a diverse place. And if you want to learn about anything, you can find somebody to talk to about it and learn about it. You can learn about somebody's cultural background. You can learn about their religions. You can learn about their affiliations. You can learn about their professional likings. And this is just America as a cultural fabric is such a rich resource to learn about what holds it all together, right? And I think that's really the challenge that we have to think about, is how do we hold it all together rather than tear it apart.
And what I feel is that you see the same biases in both groups. So basically, when you see the discussion, you see the same argumentation faults, you see the same bad logic, and like as you said, like maybe it's about to not identify with like maybe that's the way, like not to take dress on any group.
But it takes a lot of courage, because it's a lot easier to be in the middle.
Okay.
In the safe, predictable
okay
part with the crowd, right? It's there's a lot of safety in being part of a group. There's a lot of danger in not being part of the group.
So there should be a movement, like not to be in any movement.
Yeah. I don't go to that bar. Too many people go there.
Yeah. So and that's the paradox of being punk, yeah. Because if you wear the same punk dress as others, you are not punk. So you have to be like innovative in being punk, because if others follow you, then you have to like step out again, and so it's forever process. Yeah.
The hipster paradox.
Hipster paradox, yeah. The opposite of the hipster is hipster too.
Yeah.
I love it, yeah. So, and there's a science, actually. They made a research like on hipsters, and why all hipsters seems to be the same. And there's a mathematical formula of that. Like if you try to be different, you end to be the same. So it's based in logic too.
Yeah.
So
there was somebody I heard about recently who complained that somebody had used a picture of him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was not him.
Article about hipsters, yeah. So, and I think that in Berlin, there's a movement of norm. They call it normcore, and it's just the opposite of being hipster. It's being like the most average guy from all. And I love it. Like I'm trying to be normcore. Like my black T-shirt, I have like 7 of the same T-shirts, and I feel like very strange in New York, because whenever I'm in subway, I'm the most average guy.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any crazy things on myself. I'm just average, and I love it. It's my way of being punk in New York. Not to be like no tattoos, no crazy stuff on my ears, and it's somehow has kind of value to me to be a normcore in New York.
But I think you raise a good question, which is, what do we do next, right? And if we believe in what we're talking about, then we don't end with talk. We go and do something about it.
So then what is your plan? Like?
So I think, so I did not talk about gardening. I promised to talk about gardening.
Okay.
And
So
and you should kick me out of here because I know you have a flight to catch. But I'll tell you, gardening is one of the most punk things you can do because we live in a society now where for decades when we have this notion of pests, right? So, hey, here's a pest that is eating my tomato plant. Let me kill it.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from us putting ourselves at the center of the universe, and we think we're the most important creature that lives here, and we say, okay, let me kill it. And you kill for decades, and now it's suddenly like, wait a minute, I'm in trouble. I don't have bees. I don't have this and that. And so we spend a lot of time killing stuff, and now I think we need to think about making things live. And so
it's so important. Like it's so important to understand the complex systems. Like if you kill that little bug, then you influence the things that are connected. So those complex networks, like you cannot predict the outcome. If you kill something, you can destroy the kind of butterfly effect.
Yeah, exactly. With the focus on butterflies. Now there's a whole movement to save the monarch butterfly because we saw their numbers drop. And I think we're starting to see some impacts of that, but we're only saving the monarch because it looks nice. In my opinion, there's a lot more butterflies that we need to save, right? And they may not look as nice. And the classic book in America is Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss, which is everything matters no matter how small. That's the moral of the story, right? And there's a lot of things that we don't see that are worth saving, and we're not saving them. And that's been a transition of my gardening philosophies. I started off being very English cottage garden and growing plants and things like that. And then
now we have a punk garden.
Yeah, I moved to a more natural. So actually,
I saw some pictures, by the way. Last time, Sid showed me like all those pictures of amazing flowers and what you had there, the box or what was that? You showed me like that something. You have a nest of something there, or what was that?
There are birds, there are bees, bugs.
Maybe the woodpeckers.
Oh yeah, woodpeckers. Yeah. And woodpeckers. So you can actually again experimenting, right? Micro experimentation. But the gardener that I then moved on from cottage gardening to looking at Piet Udolf, European gardener, would design the highline here, very natural planting. So you start to use native plants. And then I read a book called Bringing Nature Home, which is all about create the whole ecosystem, all the way from healthy soil, right? Let everything live. And what's amazing is you'll start to see creatures appear in your yard that never existed there before, right? So the birds come to eat the bugs. And so as a consequence of doing those experiments, I've seen over 100 species in my yard of birds, right? Wow. Which never exist. And this summer, I saw bats. So bats had appeared to eat the bugs. And so you start to see more and more creatures. Last winter, I saw a red fox. And so it's an amazing transformation to go from a very barren, dead, you might think you have a garden, but you don't because it's actually dead, to a vibrant, living environment. And that's a micro experiment in one person's yard, right? The really awesome thing would be if we could replicate that grassroots in everybody's yard, right?
But what I feel is that like we are doing the exact opposite, and we should switch the mindset because as we see, like we are like deploying just the opposite strategies, like how to be quicker in this because we don't have a time for that. Like maybe time is clicking, and we don't have a time to with the climate change. Probably some people think that we are just before the tipping point. Some think that we are just after the tipping point. So how to deploy this strategy on a larger scale? Another tough question. Sorry for that.
No, it has to be grassroots, right? And we have to realize that something's wrong. If you don't realize that something's wrong, you're not going to do anything about it. And again, you cannot convince people with logic. You cannot say, oh, look, the worldwide temperature has risen by 1 degree centigrade. Nobody's going to buy that. What does it mean to me? So what? Who cares, And I think that it has to be personal. It has to be resonate with your values. It has to be something that you feel you can control and actually make a change for. A lot of people don't get involved in changing things because it's too big of a problem. Like, what can I do as a single person? You know. So that's why this is the kind of thing where if you can do it at a grassroots level, it becomes like, I think the whole movement around saving the monarchs started small, and then everybody started buying into it and said, oh, you know what, if I in our agricultural fields, we've killed milkweed, and milkweed is the only plant that monarchs will use to lay their eggs. And so then you had all these people all across the country just planting milkweed and helping the monarchs survive, because they go from Canada to Mexico. That's how they fly, and it's 2 generations that go up and down, right?
So we have some successful stories.
Yeah. And so if you can build that consciousness where people care, then they will do something and find the time for it. So that's the other thing is I really think that you need to figure out, as you go about the process of figuring out your values, you have to also figure out what's important in your life. And this is really key, is if you can write down on a piece of paper, these are the things that are important to me in my life, and then you figure out how to spend every day doing those important things, you'll end up having a fulfilled life. People talk about success, but it's actually really about fulfillment. You can have, there's so many stories of people who you look at them and they're so successful, and then they just disappear, right? And you're like, what happened to that person? I thought they were successful, but it turned out that they were not fulfilled. And it's really about being fulfilled.
That's the problem of Western world, that people are depressed because they are successful but not fulfilled. So fulfillment is the key. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So lots of things that we talked about, and so we definitely have to collaborate on. Pick one of those things, and then we'll just go do it.
Yeah, because I want to one of the reasons I do this podcast is really to inspire people in those big ideas, like how to really change the world. And what are the key things to focus on? And we covered many of those big ideas today. And I'm going to have a talk about climate change the next month. It's a conference about critical thinking, and I want to deliver short 30 minutes talk about the best talk about climate change that I can do, based in research. So basically, I want to ask you how you think that I should deliver that talk. What would you tell there? If logic doesn't work, what should I use there as examples, or how to design such a talk?
Yeah, I think it's dependent on what you want to get out of it, right? If you were to walk away from that talk and it was the most successful talk you've ever done, what would you want people to do as a result of your talk? And start there, and then you have to bring it home where it's personal for people. So if you're doing it in a particular city, every city has a climate change story. We just don't know yet. We don't know it yet.
Okay.
You should take a walk around downtown Manhattan. You might see it, but you'll actually see the outline of what Manhattan used to look like. It's actually marked on the sidewalks, and you can see markers. This is where Manhattan used to be, and we've built it out. And you look at climate change projections, and they show what Manhattan would look like in a climate change situation, right? It's very different. And I think those kinds of impacts are real and happening right now in every city.
Okay.
And
so use local examples.
Use local examples, bring it home. And I don't think it even makes sense to talk about, is climate change happening or not, right? And why it's happening and what caused it. That's a fruitless conversation. What makes sense is, here are the effects of climate change. Here's how it's impacting us right now in this place. And we live here. So what do we want to do about it? Yeah. And the answer is not to do nothing. Yeah. Right? So we have to do something about it. And there's so many different dimensions you could pursue that. Yeah. A lot of people are trying to go top down from government and policy and filter that down. And I think that's one way to look at it. But there's a lot that can be done at a local level. Yeah.
It's another punk strategy to start from the bottom up and try to change things from those small little movements, changes, and then change the whole.
Yeah.
So okay, thank you so much. Yeah. So at the end, I'm always asking like, what do you think? What is the main purpose of life? Like, what, according to your unique experience, what is purpose of your life?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it. Again, I don't think there's any right or wrong answers. Right? And if you asked me this question when I was 15, I would tell you something different than at 20 and 30 and 40 and so on. So you keep learning throughout life. And I think the purpose of life is to acknowledge what an awesome, wonderful experience you're privileged to have. Right? And like I said, you go through everybody goes through adversity. How do you deal with it and come out of it is important. And we're not done with adversity. We're going to see more adversity in life, right? As you get older, you age, you deal with tragedies in your families, and that's not going to go away. But in spite of all that, you've been given this amazing privilege to do something. I was thinking about this the other day. Is a lot of the ways that we're given a moral framework to think about how to operate in life is very focused on you. So, for example, if I am a do-gooder, then I'll go to heaven. If I do well and don't hurt others, I will have good karma and I will get reincarnated, right? So all these stories are very focused on you as an individual. What I would like to do is start to get people thinking more about what's really important is how did you impact the lives of others around you. Right? And that's really what's important, is the network effect of you with all your superpowers have the ability to impact and improve the lives of all these people around you. And how many lives did you touch? And then that brings meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And if you can, I say, don't try to think about it for your whole life. Think about it today. So figure out what's important to you, spend today only doing those important things. And then at the end of today, you'll say, I had a good day.
Right.
And then wake up tomorrow and do it again and do it again. And then I love this quote from Annie Dillard, which is something like, how you spend your days is how you spend your life. So just focus on it one day at a time and live a purposeful life every day. And then you'll end up at the end of your life with no regrets.
Yeah. Basically, this is wow. This is amazing. Like, it's just the exact definition of what I'm trying to do, because I feel that every day is really separated, and we wake up and we have the day in our hands, and it really depends on you how you feel at the end of the day. If you live the day to the fullest, if you do meaningful activities, at the end you are happy. And if you live every day like that, then you are not afraid of that, because like, you did the most what you can. But if you are like wasting your time, wasting your potential, well, you are afraid of that, because you know that you wasted your life and you wasted the only opportunity we probably have, or in my world. Yeah.
Life is for living.
Life is for living.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was a great end, and I will invite you for another episode for sure. And I want to shoot.
We're not done talking.
Yeah, we are not done, and I want to shoot another episode at your place in your garden.
Yeah.
With the background of the garden, because here we are like next to the Wall Street, so a little bit different vibe of the city. So let's go to the nature next time.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for listening to our discussion, and I'm looking forward to the next episode. So have a great day. Bye.
Bye.